Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 174th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And the date is the 19th of January. It's really cold where we are in Stockport, and that's probably the same in Salford. But we have a guest, John Woodhouse, who's in Totnes in Devon, isn't it? Is it cold and chilly there as well?
It's always sunny in Devon, Frank. I wouldn't want you to. We're part all members of the tourist board down here.
John, we've spoken a couple of I think a couple of times now, but do you want to give a little introduction as to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm John Woodhouse. I'm the one of the founding directors at Safeguarding Network. We work with schools, colleges, early years settings um, to support DSLs with their task. We see that keeping children safe in education has tons of guidance. It's probably the most holistic guidance for safeguarding that there is in the country, but it has expectations all the way up here, while the resourcing and support and training that's available to DSLs is much lower. So we make that easy for people and try to provide kind of scaffolded resources that mean they can really improve the robustness of their safeguarding while saving hours of time trying to pull this information together for what's an absolutely critical venture in a school. And again, another reminder of that today with the publication of Ofsted's report.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, isn't it, for small schools as well? You know, the even though there may be fewer pupils, but having fewer staff means that some of these challenges, a DSL may have multiple responsibilities in a small school, whereas in a larger school that may be one of their main functions. So
Yeah,
I mean, bearing in mind where you are, because I think we were talking before, that's your son's school at the back in there, isn't it? Is that a
immediately
small
behind us.
is that a small
Uh,
school?
it's a tiny school. It's got, I think, 54 children
Yeah.
on roll. We're very lucky in that sense. But the head teacher was carrying the DSL role in addition to every other hat that a head teacher wears. I mean, by definition, the DSL's got to be a member of SLT, so they're involved in lots and lots of activity. And we just don't really know how people manage to get things done. Especially in the context of a greater and greater reliance on schools as local authorities pull back from safeguarding activities to focus on child protection work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Stan.
I was just going to say, I think that's probably quite common in primary schools, is it? That the DSL is the head or deputy.
It's better if they can identify somebody else, because then you've got two different people looking at something and there's an opportunity for challenge and difference, as well as the kind of time side of things. So that's certainly something that we recommend. But head teachers bring tons of experience, and you need that to be a designated safeguarding lead. So many of them want to hold on to, or feel that they have to hold on to that responsibility, which is understandable. Again, what we try to do, providing people every month with a different topic to focus on with their staff, learning resources and things like that, and giving people someone to talk to when they are worried, because it's not just the kind of volume of activity, it's also the nature, the traumatic nature of the kind of things that DSLs are involved in. I think you mentioned Bronson Battersby in the news this week. Just how schools cope and how DSLs cope with those kind of activities is just so difficult for them. And I guess one of the things we're providing is effective supervision, which 94% of our schools last year renewed, which just shows that
Wow. Wow.
you've got to, that people are really valuing the opportunities to stop, think things through on an individual child safeguarding level, on a personal reflective level, but also on a strategic organizational level, about how they're getting everything in so on in place, and really feeling the pressures of that.
I'm interested because we have a guest, Carolyn Eyre, who I don't know if you know Carolyn,
Amazing.
but
Yeah.
Carolyn was the I used Carolyn as a sounding board, as a sort of like checker in a way, an auditor of
Yeah.
the practice that I was responsible for in the Co-op Academies Trust. And I thought I knew the regulations, knew the requirements reasonably well until I actually attended a session with Carolyn. And so I suppose, in a sense, the point you made before about the need for, there's something to do with intuition as well in some of this, but actually, as well as knowing the regulations, it's about relationships as well and getting a feel. But actually, how is there a point whereby a member of staff should really have had a length of time in post or as a teacher or as a manager before they actually take a DSL role on? Or is that just too simple to sort of view it that way, that it will vary from one school to another and one individual to another?
I think it's going to vary. There aren't kind of requirements set out clearly in terms of background experience for the DSLs, but they do need to be bringing that safeguarding experience. People can come in from other sectors. You get former public protection officers from the police, former social workers, and so on coming into education settings. It's a learning curve. Schools are special places, so there's a lot to learn about how a school culture operates, how a staff culture within a school operates, working with groups rather than individuals, which is how schools run things rather than the other agencies tend to be much more focused on a child and an individual family, which has its strengths but has huge gaps from a contextual safeguarding point of view. Schools are a much stronger position, so I wouldn't want to kind of limit things in that sense, but the designated safeguarding lead role is a hugely responsible position, and you look at kind of what is placed on their shoulders in keeping children safe in education, kind of Annex C responsibilities, that they are very broad. And I'm minded of the Ofsted's response, Regulation 28 response to the death of Ruth Perry in the coroner's report today. There's a line in there. No head teacher should feel the responsibility of an inspection and its outcome falls solely on their shoulders, which I think's absolutely right. That's the same with DSLs. I think safeguarding's it's a cultural activity,
well, that's
and it's how they all fit in.
Depressed, isn't it? That's as good as saying you shouldn't be depressed. Because the responsibility,
words on a page.
They do feel that responsibility, whether they should or shouldn't. They do, and I think it needs more thought about. Not that it shouldn't all rest with them, but it does. So how do we ameliorate that and make it so that it doesn't rest entirely with the head teacher?
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll probably get back into Ofsted as part of this discussion today. So, Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, it was a report, or a reported statement by an inspector to a head teacher who, when she asked about the changes to Ofsted, that the phrase as part of the feedback was, well, if we don't break a head teacher, how will we know that they're tough enough to run the school? And you just think, this week? Is that the thing to say this week? And is that what's actually going on in some inspectors' minds, that like the SAS, we have to break somebody before we can build them up again, before we can reconstruct them? Because it's absolutely totally wrong. And yet there's an inspector this week saying, well, if we don't do that, what do we do?
I think the inspection took place because it didn't happen this week. I think it happened last year. But we've worked, Stan, well, we know of inspectors who take that sort of stance, and in a way that's not been challenged sufficiently by Ofsted. They've allowed that sort of culture to develop. Certainly, I know that's not a one-off incident. I'm not saying those words have been used, but the tone and the sort of relationship between the lead inspector and the head teacher, at times, I've witnessed that as a CEO. And that was never the way that we were taught how to inspect.
I can remember, I know it's a long time ago, when I was an advisor, having been an inspector, so you know the rules, you know how it works. Actually taking in the feedback telling a lead inspector they were wrong and they shouldn't use phrases like that and they shouldn't do things like that. At which point they stormed out. But I know I was in the right.
Yes, yes. I mean,
But
go on, John, you're going to say?
I was going to say systemically, it's wrong. If we have a very top-down approach to inspection that's pushing stuff down, that's trying to break people in order to understand whether they're competent or not, that systemically affects the way that schools operate. And actually, it's anti-task. Our job here is around nurture, it's around development, is around enabling children to learn. And so you have to build the whole system in that kind of way, and we've missed that. We've really missed that as a sector since the days when inspectors would come in and talk in that empowering developmental kind of way. It's interesting to see some of those things being said by Sir Martin in terms of the direction of travel, the kind of thing that he's trying to create around the big listen. But that's going to be an absolutely mammoth journey. It exists already. You go if you're inspected by ISI, it's a completely different process.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it was also, can we just deal with this Ofsted thing as well at the moment? I mean, there is an internal review, and I always get, I've avoided watching the post office drama. My wife and I have we watch one episode each night because, to be honest, it's quite awful. You know, I think it's not something you can binge. Yeah, it's not something you could do. If you haven't watched it, do not watch all four of these one after the other. I mean, it's just gruesome. But for me, the second episode, which we saw last night, was about the external consultant going into the post office and talking to some of the post masters and mistresses about their experiences and actually starting to unravel the story that the post office had. And it was really important, I think, that was somebody who knew the post office, but actually wasn't employed by the post office, had nothing to do with the post office at that point. And so his credibility to those people who were, who felt wronged was at least a reasonable starting point. I have serious concerns now about an internal review of any kind by Ofsted being led by somebody who actually works for Ofsted or is closely associated with Ofsted. I just feel as though that is not where we
ought
your
application, Frank?
Well, I probably wouldn't be asked, but would I do it is probably an interesting question. I do know of other colleagues who are probably better placed to do it than myself. But actually, you think, well, for me, I'll be all over that, depending on who the person is that they appoint, and how much, what is their brief, is that because I know that there are HMI working now who, if given the chance and given, sort of confidentiality, would be very critical of some of the processes and practices that are being delivered by senior managers in the inspectorate or were, prior to Martin Oliver's appointment. We really do need to cleanse the organisation. I think we need the framework revisited because we get, the safeguarding grade, there's a right mess being made of that at the moment. For me, that the whole thing needs to be looked at very critically, and anybody who's currently working for them or sitting in cahoots with them, I think that's just going to be a missed opportunity.
That's going to need a reform of the kind of political approach to Ofsted as well, though, because Ofsted hasn't created itself in this kind of way. This stems back to Sharon Shoesmith, Director of Children's Services at Haringey, standing on the steps saying, Ofsted said we're good. And then the government absolutely going after Ofsted to in terms of the kind of model that they want to see, the kind of approach that they want to see, and the accountability being the only word, not just part of the process, the only thing that Ofsted are being required to look at. And without that political support, the organisation isn't going to shift.
Well, the DfE have got a part to play in how much stress is in an Ofsted inspection because of the potential for an outcome which changes the life of the school forever. And I do think, I know Spielman mentioned that at one stage, and I do think that needs looking at, because the pressure used to be well, the worst thing is we go into a category and we then get some support and we get out of it as a school. There was never a case, I don't think, of masses of parents taking the children away from a school. My experience is quite the opposite, that the parental body gathered round and supported the school because they knew it better than the inspector. But that concept then, that because, quote from the head teacher, I've made a mess of this and we've gone into a category, the school is now going to become an academy, or it's going to move from one academy to another, and everything is literally on my shoulders. And I think that link is what needs to be broken.
Yeah.
You know, I think there needs to be a wider view on whether a school should be a forced academy rather than the result of one inspection.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Technically, two inspections. Sorry.
that's all right. John, what's caught your eye this week?
So there's been an article in a number of the papers. The one I was going to pick out was The Guardian, around some figures gathered from by the National Police Chiefs Council, showing that children are now the biggest perpetrators of sexual abuse against children, I think, was the headline. And I challenged that a little bit in terms of our kind of our understanding of sexual abuse of children. We're very good at looking away and not understanding and seeing what the real issues are. From kind of Victorian denial of abuse through 1970s focus when we were growing up was all about the man in the Mac, you know, the stranger danger. It wasn't until the last 25 years that we accepted that most abuse is perpetrated by people they know. But again, it seems it's a topic people really struggle to cope with and look to externalize and project out. So the idea of it being those other families where sexual abuse happens rather than our families where sexual abuse does happen, and among our children as well. So it's phenomenally changed over the last 15 years or so, with the advent of kind of technology and the accessibility of technology for children. So the twin pressures of easy access to pornography is causing it, well, what's described as an enormous experiment with our whole society. What happens if many of us are accessing pornography on such a frequent basis, and not just kind of quite extreme pornography and so on as well, which is changing the way that we behave as a society around things like anal intercourse and around sadomasochistic kind of practices and so on as well, which has changed the way we're all behaving. Our children are a microcosm of our society. So, you look at the Me Too movement. Should we be surprised in any way that young people's peers are such a phenomenal influence on one another? There's a few other bits in there. I mean, I think the surfacing of Ofsted 3 years ago did a report around sexual violence and sexually harmful behaviour in schools that had some frightening statistics about the kind of nature of that. So it is an area that's come to schools' attention a lot more. So there's a lot more reporting of the things that are going on for children. But I think there are still gaps. The one that really kind of jumps out at me is sibling sexual abuse, that just is never talked about, but is likely to be affecting 1 in 20 children in our schools, which is more than one a class.
Is there a
we don't just get to it.
Is there a risk in this, Jonathan? I remember when the big thing for schools was racial abuse and racial and reception classes were the classes that reported most racial abuse in the school, and that was through children saying words that were deemed to be not words you can use. Curious 4-year-olds saying, "You're a different color than me, you're black, I'm not," etc. So is there an element of that in the reporting of sexual abuse in schools?
I think you've got the twin kind of areas around young people are growing up and they're exploring and they're learning. But that can't be at the expense of
No.
other
Oh,
other
I
students.
appreciate that.
And so, well, again, all this stuff comes back to cultural stuff and the interplay between kind of family environment and what's going on within families, local communities, and what's happening in a school community. Schools are in the best position to influence this generation of our
Yeah.
young people, but the pressures on our young people are so significant. So the exploration of issues now involves people sharing images with one another and so on, and it's just massively damaging.
I think it's
For young
interesting. I
people.
was asked. I remember going to one of the secondary academies in Manchester, and I covered for a year 10 lesson, and they were talking. They were doing work around doing the work around the internet. It was a technology thing, and one of the students said that, well, actually, I look quite a lot of stuff on my phone, but I basically wipe clear the history. So actually, nobody knows what I've been looking at.
Absolutely,
And,
absolutely.
and in a way, that stuck with me because this is a student who is 14 or 15, who perhaps is not aware, like it was mentioned in the report, wasn't it, that a lot of young people are not aware that they're breaking the law. They're not aware of what their responsibilities as well as their rights are in this area, because actually we don't talk to them about it.
I don't we know. I don't think as a society we've got to grips with how to regulate the internet yet, and how to kind of put the laws and safety systems that we have in place in other parts of our society in place online.
But do
When
young
we do
people?
that,
Go on, sorry, John.
I was just going to say we you can imagine. I've got four children, so you can imagine safeguarding. We try to be quite hot on that in our family. So everything was locked down and so on. But my son went to school, and we found out a year or two later that he'd learned how to bypass all the systems that we'd put in place at school from his friends using being shown how to use VPNs and
Yeah,
whatever. So again, it all schools are right at the center of this. You have to be right at the center of this discussion, and our staff just don't feel confident or
no,
comfortable with talking about online safety, but particularly talking about sex.
yes, it is. I think, and actually, it gets to the heart of what a good education is, doesn't it? If we're actually avoiding teaching things that young people need to know about simply because we're embarrassed to talk about, but these are critical issues in their lives. Wow, where have we got to? We'd much prefer to talk about history, the Victorians or whatever, rather than deal with, the risks associated with the internet.
But you've also got the other pressure in some schools that by simply suggesting we're going to talk about sex, you have parents banging on the doors and ringing the press, and there's no easy route through
No,
this.
no. It's funny because government's tried, hasn't it, to try to sort of strengthen its control over the internet. And actually, those are stumbled across because it comes up against the libertarians as well. But I think the point we're making here, for me, it's that we need to have more conversations about this sort of stuff with young people in a controlled environment in schools, so that they don't find out, when an image comes through, they then have to share that because they don't know what they're going to do with it, or they don't do anything about it, they just accept it.
I think it starts with our staff teams having those conversations with your staff group about how we deal with these kind of things, how we recognize them, how we feel about that. What are we doing proactively? We quite often get approached for harmful sexual behavior training, and we offer that on our website, all those kind of things, plug. But our first question back when organizations ask us to do this is, so what have you done in terms of ordinary sexual development. Let's forget the harmful bit of it. And quite often that stuff's been missing. That people haven't managed to do things to the depth that they do need to be able to get hold of those. We produce, like, every month, people get a different pack on a different area of safeguarding, and there are kind of an online safety training pack, which gives questions and ideas for people to be thinking about and talking through. And we've got about 1,500 schools that are members across the country, and they really value the discussion points, because it's the conversations, I think, that then create the kind of understanding, and then the recognition of, well, what does that mean for us? How can we then start to do something a bit differently here and recognize those young people who are needing our help most?
Great. Well, what's caught my eye, I've got a few things actually, but let's play the Good and RI game, which basically I saw Dr. James Mannion did this with a friend of his, a colleague, on his podcast, and he published it yesterday. And this is really, you just read a couple of sentences from an Ofsted report and you have to guess whether it's good or requires improvement. And some of the examples he gave, you just knew where it was going. It read like it was going to be requires improvement, and it should have been, but you just knew he wouldn't have used that example unless it was good, and vice versa, so at the end of it, you knew which way it was going to go, not because of the words, but simply because of the example was so positive, it had to be RI, and the other one was so bad, it had to be good. So I will put the link at the end of this, as I will put a link for your website as well, John. If you're interested in playing that game, it's a fascinating little clip of a couple of minutes. But I would say I read hundreds of Ofsted reports, and you can come up with, probably for every 100 reports, you could probably come up with 20 where you could play that game and still not be sure which way it's going to go.
We just need to kind of boil it all down to just a single word judgment, don't we? And then, no, we've tried that. Sorry.
We've tried that. Yeah. Before we go, there is the suggestion today, isn't there, that the Ofsted, that safeguarding sits outside of, or its relationship with the actual inspection is shifted now. It may be that it's extracted out, or less emphasis is given to it. Unless it's systemic problems, that's only then does it actually affect the leadership grade. I mean, before we disappear for this week, I'm interested in John and Stan's view on that. We'll go to John first. So what's your take on it, John?
I think, haven't we been here before? So it wasn't that long ago that safeguarding was integrated with the leadership judgment. There are, I think you need to look at this in the whole, where there are very simple issues that can be fixed. Things like, you've missed this off your policy and it's required, so you would be, requiring improvement or inadequate. But I'm back tomorrow. Let's have a look at that. I've been with an ISI inspector who said that, and the next day it was there. They looked at it and said, "Great, yeah, that passes." And that kind of stuff where, you can deal with and you can get through. I've yet to walk into any setting, be it children's homes or schools, where safeguarding is a mess, and leadership and culture are strong, stable, and reflective. It does it. The two things are very closely associated, but. I don't really see any problem with separating the safeguarding judgment from leadership. It gives you a chance to kind of look at things from more than one perspective. And
I think, as you said before, most people who lead on this area, if they're an Ofsted inspector, tend not to be. They're effective, we hope, leaders, not necessarily aware of all the requirements within this, the world of safeguarding. So perhaps
they've got experience in schools and colleges, running schools and colleges, and in leadership positions, rather than safeguarding specialists. But certainly than the regs.
Yeah, that's why I'd like to see it taken out of Ofsted altogether to an annual audit of safeguarding in schools done by. I mentioned this once before and said sort of done by the LA. I didn't mean done by the LA. I meant that they were responsible for choosing the agencies to do this and making sure it was done, or trusts were responsible for recruiting the agencies to do it. So we've got specialist people going into schools, giving it an audit, and then Ofsted can pick up the audit. And the question for Ofsted then would be, is the audit good? Are there anything that's wrong with the audit? What have you done since then to put those things right? And that conversation with the head could take place before the inspection, in a dialogue, a conversation. And then if an Ofsted inspector sees something during the inspection that is a safeguarding issue, they should report it to the DSL, as everyone else should do if they see something.
Schools and colleges can do that to an extent already. We visit lots of schools and colleges. We don't audit though. I push back at that one. We review and we explore together with the school, because actually they know their children and young people best. And when you work alongside someone and you enable them in a reflective way to look at things from another angle, you're much more likely to get them on side than some kind of, the Section 11 audits and so on. I don't think they are desperately strong in protecting children over the sense of a conversation with somebody who really knows safeguarding, with a school leader who really knows their school and their students. Together with a strong governing body, I think, as the other bits that chip into there. Your governors have got to be holding your school to account, because otherwise the school leaders have too much power within that, which is
the advantage for me though is that it's something then that can be fixed, can be improved, and out of the threat of the school's going to go into a category, blah blah blah. And I know we've said, if it's a simple thing, it should be able to fit. But even if it's a systemic thing, then every 3 years, every 5 years isn't often enough.
Exactly.
So it doesn't work either way with Ofsted. I mean, my view is lots of things should be done on a regular basis, a financial audit, etc., and then an open dialogue with the inspector to say, these are the people, the experts that have been in our school over the last 3 years. This is what they've said. So you can concentrate on the teaching, learning, and leadership, which is, I think, what Ofsted should be about.
Right. Well,
my rant's over.
Well, that's how 35 minutes goes on a Friday morning. Thank you so much, John. I'll put a link following the video, but I don't know if you want to give a plug for your business for anybody listening. They can. Is it just? It's not just for the Southwest, is it? It's
no, we're national. Right. We're all over. We're all over the country. So we have consultants up in the northeast, northwest, London, Birmingham, you name it. Plug for the business. I mean, come and have a look. Arrange a time to come and have a look around the site. We charge £99 plus VAT a term, and people are always surprised at how much we manage to fit into that. The kind of concept of it has all been built alongside DSL. Sitting, the idea of safeguarding network came from sitting with a group of designated safeguarding leads, saying this is really tough. There's too much to do. Creating for them some resources on FGM and domestic abuse that they loved, that they asked if they could take it back to their staff. And we thought, why is every DSL in the country doing this on their own? Can we do this together? So it's very much co-design. It's very, you get a 2-year rolling curriculum that takes you through every area in keeping children safe in education, in little 15 to 20 minute chunks that fit in a staff meeting. So you're not having to ask people to find any more inset time, goodness, or to ask, quite beleaguered staff. You look at the hours that staff are working and running twilight sessions, when actually what they're really thinking about is, how am I now going to manage to get into Sainsbury's and get stuff to get home and to cook in time for the kids?
Yeah. So that was thank you everybody for joining us. Oh, John, there was one thing. There was a possibility of a little bonus for Frank and Stan chat followers.
Yeah, no problem. I think I thought we'd create a discount code so that we know that people have come from your webinar. So if we create the code Stan20, if that's not too much, Frank, which will get people £20 off their first session, their first term, or their first year's membership with us. So it'd be good to Good to have your members join us.
All right,
Yeah,
that's great.
excellent.
Okay, and so until next week, we'll see you all then. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.